You selected the subject microeconomics, which is the study of demand, supply, prices and stock. It's where businesses can be economically successful by understanding their own product, the market and what competition's out there. So this subject is a part of the subject Construction Economics 1. Before we go too far, let's just summarise some of the course requirements and some information about the course. If you have any questions during the subject, you can contact me. You can contact me via email or using one of the Q&A forums, or you can put up a discussion or a question with fellow students on the student discussion forum. Be very clear about assessment submission dates and extension of time if you submit for an extension, the requirement and the avenues on Moodle to be used, the presentation and assessment format, and also be very clear that this presentation is a summary only of the subject and it's not to be taken as a substitute in any shape or form of the study guide, the text and the resource material. So micro means small, and if we concern ourselves with the economic behaviour of firms and individuals, this is where microeconomics is at. It's really a focus on, in most cases, scarcity. So microeconomics is generally called the economics of scarcity or the economics of trade-off. Both the macro and the micro side are very useful in planning ahead and actually gauging where you are in the community, and also micro where you are as a business. So the microeconomics really helps us understand the context in which business decisions have to be made, and the rationale decision that assumes wrong decisions are not useful. So that demand, supply, prices and stock really are very important in microeconomics. I think it's easier to look at the supply and demand in its most simplest form rather than a theory, and that's what these graphs here are there to represent. If you consider the price being the axis, the vertical axis, and the quantity being the horizontal axis, there you can see the price fluctuations on both as supply either increases or decreases. And what it means, I suppose, if you want to summarise it, is because of the relationship between demand for a good and its price. When people usually demand more of a good, its price generally falls, and so the demand curve has a negative slope. There's a period though with supply and demand though called equilibrium, which is when the demand equals the supply, and you can see on this graph here that equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, once they're set, there's no systematic tendency for them to generally change. So knowing that equilibrium price is fairly important if we look at this slide, where that if the excess supply tend to push down the price, and if the price is set above the equilibrium level, then supply will exceed the demand. With maximum prices, conversely, if the price is held down, people will not be able to buy as much as they like, and the excess demand will equal, as we've got here, CD. The examples, this might include rent control, bargaining sales and so forth. Again, changes in demand and movements along this demand curve show how demand changes with respect to price. And other influences you need to factor in here that shift that whole curve along. So the equilibrium price therefore tend to rise. These causes can be things such as additional population, changes in mood or taste, more income, and changes in expectation. So the movements in price of a good do not shift the demand curve for the good. They cause a movement along the curve without shifting really the whole curve. And here we can demonstrate changes in supply too. And supply generally can shift because of either new technology, cheaper inputs, more sellers in the marketplace, changes of buyers' expectations, and supply generally. So again, the movements in the price of a good do not shift the supply curve. They cause movements along the supply curve. We'll often hear in economics terms such as elasticity, which really is the percentage in change of price and percentage change in the quantity demanded. An example here might be the price of a good increases by 5% as a result of a demand that falls by 10%. The elasticity of the demand, therefore, would be 2, because it's the demand 10 over the goods increase by 5, 2. So the elasticity would stay the same when the price changes if the elasticity was 1. So if the total revenue goes up when the price increases, that must mean that the percentage change in price will fall in the quantity. Demand is said to be inelastic when the demand curve looks too steep. So these graphs are more important looking at they're a gauge really on the incline of where demand is or where price is. And as you can see, the changes in both price and quantity will then dictate the elasticity. Land has some interesting fundamentals in the sense that its market is purely driven by the fact that it's a fixed commodity. Land available is generally has physical characteristics that it's not mobile, it's not movable, it's indestructible, and so we say that the characteristics of land, generally the location itself, make it scarce. If it's waterfront, if it's on a hilltop, there won't be that many blocks of land in that geographical region in respect to amenities or communications, that type of thing. Restrictions on its use and the easements are rights of way that across that land, whether the land is productive, its physical state, and the current state of the economy in which the land and its ownership. So certain stages in the economy, land or those areas next to water or farming become more and more valuable in the economy. The good thing about land, though, I must say, is that it's usually its highest and best use. So to derive an income from it, obtain capital gain, that's over a period of time, and a combination of both 1 and 2, which makes it, that's why it makes it such a good prime investment opportunity. And so generally attracts affluent people and companies that easily dominate the land and the property industry. It's important to understand and consider the several sources of building finance. I've listed all of them here. I'm not going to talk about them in detail, but having said that, it's important to realise that there's more than just getting bank finance to fund construction or land development. And in the current economic climate since 2007, that's been very important as well, because some of those avenues have changed for different reasons as money has become more difficult to obtain. Not only is there an issue of considering how to fund and finance the construction or the land development, but the industry itself is extremely sensitive to the supply of land, construction lead times, the amount of time it takes to actually establish construction, the expensive and holding costs of construction itself, the long lifespans of buildings, which means, okay, there's so many buildings out there at the moment, we really don't need any new ones for a while, and general space and vacancy rates, again, which is what we're looking at previously with those graphs with supply and demand. They can be very fickle things with the general community and the marketplace. So out of all of that too, we also have structural change in much bigger in the overall economy. So we've got changes in population. People talk about the baby boom, which is population growth. So these demographic changes have a really big impact on construction and looking ahead with the demand for buildings and land development, the high intake of migrants overseas and those type of numbers, very important. Technological change, that's another area which has an impact on automation, computers, labour-saving avenues, which again have an impact on construction and the delivery of assets. Changes in global trade, where Australia is becoming extremely more and more interdependent. We're exporting food and importing technology. So that trend towards de-industrialisation, where major factories are closing down or going offshore, as it's much cheaper to do otherwise. And then situations such as market saturation, where there's actually too much of one type of asset or building or units or that type of development, it's actually exceeded the market demand at the time. Within the construction companies, it's very interesting now as well. I think plant and equipment generally in the construction industry is nearly almost always hired now when it's needed, where years ago a building contractor owned and maintained his own equipment. There's a lot of advantages with hiring plant rather than buying plant, and that gives flexibility to the contractor. You don't need to be burdened with the long-term maintenance and upkeep of the equipment and reliability factor, and often even the equipment operators as well. So there can be more accurate pricing and costing of hire equipment attributed to a project, much easier to rationalise. And this is an area where, on an economic term, the building construction sector have actually changed and made themselves more efficient in delivering buildings and large-scale assets. We've come to the end of the presentation now for topic 3, and it's a good opportunity to go back and read through the study guide. And I'd strongly suggest reading through subject text as well on these areas, just so you're familiar with supply and demand and equilibrium, and really understand the fundamentals of those. Not necessarily in great detail about how to apply, but really why they occur. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the Q&A forum or contact myself.